Yes, you can terminate the underground feeder cable in the garage panel, given it serves as a branch circuit and not a service feed. When terminating the underground feeder cable, firstly, employ a listed underground feeder connector to establish a watertight and secure connection. Secondly, ensure the underground feeder cable is securely fastened within 12 inches of the panel. Thirdly, create a drip loop with the underground feeder cable to avert moisture ingress into the panel. Since a branch circuit is being installed, service entrance cable is not mandatory. Underground feeder cable is permissible for the entire span from the house to the garage panel. Install an 8-foot ground rod at the garage. Link the ground rod to the ground bus of the sub-panel. The messenger wire selected should be designated for outdoor applications and appropriately sized for the underground feeder cable. Verify that the underground feeder cable is shielded from direct sunlight exposure, as it lacks ultraviolet listing. Employ a listed weatherproof box at the garage termination point to shield the connections from environmental elements. Considering the distance between the house and the detached garage being 60 feet, the installation necessitates careful attention to detail to ensure safety and code compliance. The existing setup involving 10/2 underground feeder cable tied to ceramic clevis tight supports at both the house and the garage, without a messenger wire and lacking ultraviolet listing, is not compliant with modern electrical standards. Upgrading the setup requires adherence to Table 396.10, which pertains to messenger-supported wiring. When installing the underground feeder cable on a messenger wire from the house to the garage, several key points must be addressed to ensure a safe and code-compliant installation. Firstly, the selection of the messenger wire is crucial. The messenger wire must be listed for outdoor use and be of adequate strength to support the weight of the underground feeder cable plus any additional loads such as ice or wind. The size of the messenger wire should be determined based on the span length, cable weight, and local weather conditions. Secondly, the method of attaching the underground feeder cable to the messenger wire is important. Cable ties or specially designed clips should be used to secure the underground feeder cable to the messenger wire at regular intervals. These fasteners must be UV resistant to prevent degradation from sunlight. The spacing between the fasteners should be sufficient to prevent the cable from sagging excessively, but not so tight as to restrict movement due to thermal expansion and contraction. Thirdly, the attachment points at the house and garage must be structurally sound and properly grounded. The messenger wire should be anchored to the buildings using hardware that is designed for this purpose. Eye-bolts or similar fasteners should be used, and they must be securely attached to the building structure. A grounding conductor should be connected to the messenger wire at both ends to ensure that it is properly grounded. At the point of attachment at the garage, it is permissible to terminate the underground feeder cable directly into the garage panel, provided that the panel is rated for this type of cable and that appropriate connectors are used. It is not necessary to splice the underground feeder cable to service entrance cable at the point of attachment. When terminating the underground feeder cable in the garage panel, a listed underground feeder connector must be used to provide a watertight and secure connection. The cable must be secured within 12 inches of the panel using appropriate cable clamps or connectors. A drip loop should be formed in the underground feeder cable just before it enters the panel to prevent moisture from entering the panel. The installation of a ground rod at the garage is essential for providing a proper grounding electrode system. An 8-foot ground rod should be driven into the earth near the garage and connected to the ground bus of the sub-panel using a grounding electrode conductor. The size of the grounding electrode conductor should be determined based on the size of the service entrance conductors, in accordance with the National Electrical Code, or NEC. In addition to the ground rod, it may be necessary to bond the metal parts of the garage to the grounding system. This includes bonding any metal water pipes, gas pipes, or other metal objects that are likely to become energized. Bonding these metal parts helps to ensure that they are at the same electrical potential as the grounding system, which reduces the risk of electric shock. Since the underground feeder cable is not ultraviolet listed, it is important to protect it from direct sunlight. This can be accomplished by routing the cable in conduit or by using a sunlight-resistant covering. The messenger wire itself is not typically considered a suitable covering, as it does not provide complete protection from ultraviolet radiation. A listed weatherproof box should be installed at the garage end of the run to protect the connections from the elements. This box should be sized appropriately to accommodate the conductors and connectors, and it should be mounted in a location that is readily accessible for inspection and maintenance. The installation should comply with all applicable codes and regulations, including the National Electrical Code, or NEC, and any local amendments. A permit may be required for the electrical work, and an inspection may be necessary to ensure that the installation is safe and code compliant. The use of 10/2 underground feeder cable for a 60-foot run may not be adequate for the intended load. The size of the conductors should be determined based on the load calculations in accordance with the National Electrical Code, or NEC. It may be necessary to upgrade the conductors to a larger size to ensure that they can safely carry the required current. When sizing the conductors, it is important to consider the voltage drop over the length of the run. Voltage drop can cause lights to dim and appliances to operate inefficiently. The National Electrical Code, or NEC, recommends limiting voltage drop to no more than 3% for branch circuits and 5% for feeders. To minimize voltage drop, it may be necessary to use larger conductors or to increase the voltage of the circuit. The National Electrical Code, or NEC, provides guidelines for calculating voltage drop and for selecting the appropriate conductor size. If the existing 8-position main lug-only panel isn't sufficient for the load requirements, it may be necessary to replace it with a larger panel. The size of the panel should be determined based on the load calculations in accordance with the National Electrical Code, or NEC. A larger panel will provide more circuit breakers, which will allow for more circuits to be installed. When selecting a new panel, it is important to choose one that is rated for the appropriate voltage and current. The panel should also be listed by a recognized testing laboratory, such as Underwriters Laboratories, or all. The installation of electrical wiring in a detached garage requires careful planning and execution to ensure safety and code compliance. By following the recommendations outlined above, the electrical system can be upgraded to provide a safe and reliable power source for the garage. The initial question pertains to whether underground feeder cable can be terminated in a garage panel, and the answer is affirmative, provided certain conditions are met. Firstly, it must be a branch circuit and not a service feed. Secondly, appropriate connectors must be utilized to ensure watertight and secure connection. Thirdly, the cable must be secured within 12 inches of the panel. Fourthly, a drip loop is necessary to prevent moisture from entering the panel. The inquiry also mentions upgrading the garage feed using underground feeder cable on a messenger wire. In this scenario, the messenger wire must be listed for outdoor use and appropriately sized for the underground feeder cable. Additionally, the underground feeder cable is not ultraviolet listed, so precautions must be taken to protect it from direct sunlight. A weatherproof box should be used at the garage end of the run to protect the connections from the elements. Furthermore, the question mentions installing an 8-foot ground rod attached to the ground boss of the subpanel, which is a standard practice for grounding detached structures. The answer confirms that service entrance cable is not required since it is a branch circuit installation, and underground feeder cable can be used for the entire run from the house to the garage panel. It emphasizes the importance of using a listed underground feeder connector, securing the cable within 12 inches of the panel, and creating a drip loop. Additionally, it highlights the necessity of using a messenger wire listed for outdoor use, protecting the underground feeder cable from sunlight, and using a listed weatherproof box at the garage end. The installation of the ground rod and its connection to the ground bus of the subpanel are also reaffirmed. Therefore, the original plan to use underground feeder cable on a messenger wire from the house to the garage is acceptable, provided that all safety and code requirements are met, including proper grounding protection from sunlight, and the use of appropriate connectors and enclosures. In addition, the conductor size should be verified to ensure it is adequate for the intended load, and voltage drop should be calculated to ensure it remains within acceptable limits. Finally, all work should be performed in accordance with the National Electrical Code, or NEC, and local codes, and a permit should be obtained if required. The use of 10/2 underground feeder cable may be sufficient for some applications, but it is essential to calculate the load requirements and voltage drop to ensure that it is adequate for the intended use. If the load is too high or the voltage drop is excessive, it may be necessary to upgrade to a larger conductor size. The existing setup involving 10/2 underground feeder cable tied to ceramic clevis type supports is not compliant with modern electrical standards and should be replaced with a code compliant installation. The installation of an 8-foot ground rod at the garage is a good practice, but it is essential to ensure that the grounding system is properly bonded to the electrical system to provide a safe and effective ground path. The grounding electrode conductor should be sized in accordance with the National Electrical Code, or NEC, and should be connected to the ground bus of the subpanel. The National Electrical Code, or NEC, specifies the requirements for grounding and bonding electrical systems. Grounding refers to the connection of electrical equipment to the earth, while bonding refers to the connection of metal parts of the electrical system to each other. The purpose of grounding and bonding is to provide a low impedance path for fault current to return to the source, which helps to trip the circuit breaker or fuse and prevent electrical shock. The grounding electrode system typically consists of a ground rod, ground plate, or underground water pipe that is connected to the grounding electrode conductor. The grounding electrode conductor is then connected to the ground bus in the electrical panel. The metal parts of the electrical system, such as metal conduits, metal enclosures, and metal equipment, are bonded together to ensure that they are at the same electrical potential. Bonding is typically accomplished by using bonding jumpers or bonding screws. The National Electrical Code, or NEC, also specifies the requirements for ground fault circuit interrupters, or GFCIs. Ground fault circuit interrupters are devices that are designed to protect people from electrical shock. Ground fault circuit interrupters work by monitoring the current flowing in the circuit and tripping the circuit breaker if a ground fault is detected. Ground fault circuit interrupters are typically required in areas where there is a high risk of electrical shock, such as bathrooms, kitchens, and outdoor locations. The installation of electrical wiring in a detached garage requires careful planning and execution to ensure safety and code compliance. By following the recommendations outlined above and adhering to the National Electrical Code, or NEC, the electrical system can be upgraded to provide a safe and reliable power source for the garage.